So we come to the next chapter in the Gospel of John. If you're just joining us, we're going through the Gospel of John. We're in chapter 9, where we see the sixth miracle. Only John doesn't call them miracle. John calls them signs. Excellent. John calls them signs because signs point the way. Signs tell you direction. And here's what John is doing. He is trying to point the way or show the direction that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, the Son of God. That is the purpose of his gospel. That's why he's writing. And so he has arranged these different signs or miracles that point the way to showing you have to give an answer as to who Jesus is and how he's doing these things. And John is saying he's doing these things because he's God. He is the Son of God. And so this morning, we come to what I think is one of the most amazing miracles in the Bible. I think it's one of the most interesting chapters in the Bible. We come to a man who was born blind, and Jesus heals him. And this chapter has a little bit of everything in it. It has a little bit of humor in it, a little bit of sadness in it. It has some good theology in it. This guy, the more that he's not named. We're going to do the whole chapter this morning. Chapter 9 is all about this man, and he's only called the man, this man, that man, the man, all throughout the chapter, and he's never given a name. I didn't feel right not giving him a name, so we're going to call him something together this morning. We're going to call him Blind Bart together this morning. That's the nickname that we're going to give him instead of this is the man, because he shows up all throughout the chapter. I've really come to just enjoy and appreciate and love Blind Bart, who's very different than the man that we met in chapter 5. If you remember in John chapter 5, Jesus healed a man who was paralyzed laying by the pool. And Jesus came and said, "Do you want to get well?" And the guy didn't even answer him. He just complained, and he said, "Well, I don't have a chance." And Jesus healed him. He didn't thank Jesus. And then he dined him out to the Pharisees and kind of stabbed Jesus in the back. Like, that guy, not a big fan of that guy. John chapter 9, this guy, Blind Bart, big fan. I think you will be too as we go through. You're just going to see, I really like this guy. And so we're intended to understand this miracle. It's also important to keep in mind where we've been the last chapter or two. It's right after the Festival of Shelters or the Festival of Booths, where Jesus stood up and declared he's the light of the world. And what is going on right here is Jesus is literally giving a living parable of giving light to someone who's been living in darkness their whole life. He's going to open his eyes and literally bring light into his life. And so it follows on the heels of that teaching. Jesus is going to authenticate his claim to be the light of the world. He's going to say it again here in verse 5. This chapter, it also deals with the issue of suffering. And why is there blindness? Why is there sickness? Why is there disease? Why did these things happen in the world? It's going to touch on that a little bit too. There's a lot in this chapter, so we got a lot to cover. So chapter 9, you guys got your Bibles. If you brought it, open up there. Excuse me. If not, we'll put it on the screens. Chapter 9, verse 1. Here we go. It says this. As he was passing by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" So let's just park the disciples' question over here for a second. We'll come to it and deal with this and what was the thinking of the day that actually still exists a little bit today. And we'll come back to that in a second. Let's just talk about the first verse, and I want you to notice this. It says, "As he was passing by, he saw a man." And this is a side note. This isn't the main point of the passage. I don't think this is the main truth that John is wanting us to get from here, but I think it is a truth that's important and might encourage you this morning, and that is this, is that Jesus sees your situation. Jesus sees your difficulty. Jesus sees your struggle. Jesus sees your pain. Jesus sees the challenges in your life. Jesus sees. Sometimes, I don't know, you can go through life and it can feel like, God, are you there? God, do you see? God, do you care? And the answer to all of that is yes, he does. He sees. He knows. He cares. Jesus is going by and he saw somebody, and you're going to see he stops and he cares. And so this morning, listen, as we go through, be encouraged to know that whatever it is that you're dealing with right now, and everybody could probably right now name at least one obstacle, one struggle, one situation. Here's what you need to know. God knows, God sees, and God cares. And so before we also tackle the second question here this morning about the disciples in verse 2, let's just take a minute and let's put ourselves in this chapter. All right, let's identify a little bit with blind Bart this morning, all right? His blindness. And let's mentally go there. Let's emotionally go there, right? Just close your eyes for a second. This is his life. This has only been his life. This is all he's ever seen. He's never seen a sunset. He's never seen a rainbow. He's heard voices. He has not seen a face. He doesn't know what a face looks like. He's never seen the face of his parents. He's heard their voices. He's never seen a flower. He's never seen anything beautiful in life. He can only imagine. You, right now, when I say flower, you can picture a flower. When I say rainbow, you can picture a rainbow. You've seen it. He has not. This is his existence right here. All right? You can open your eyes. He couldn't work. There was no job available for blind individuals. He couldn't provide, and so he would be a beggar. And so, therefore, he wouldn't marry. He would not have children. He was just dependent on the provision of others, left to a life of begging. And it's interesting in Scripture that the issue of blindness is the number one thing that Jesus healed in the Gospels. It's the most reoccurring miracle, is Jesus healing somebody blind. 5 times in the Gospels, Jesus heals somebody blind. This is the only time where we're told that the individual was born blind, that it was this way from his whole life, because not everybody that's blind was born blind. As a matter of fact, most aren't. I read this week that every 20 minutes in the United States, somebody loses their eyesight and is declared legally blind. Every 20 minutes, right? Some of us know it's coming, right? We have to wear these things, and we're moving that way. And so, when surveyed of the 5 senses, guess which of the 5 senses, when surveyed, people said they would least want to lose? The sense of sight, right? It's like I'd rather lose a sense of smell. That's actually happened to me. I still can't smell from COVID has taken away. It can be a blessing and a curse sometimes, right? And so you're always wondering, it's like, smells good to me. You never know. Never know. It affects your taste. My taste has been dull for the last year. Feel, right? Hearing. But sight is the number one thing people say, I don't want to lose my sight. It's why it's something about darkness, right? There's something, even that, when you were there for this 30 seconds, when I told you to go there, we don't like darkness. We don't want to live in darkness. There's something about that. It made me think about, little kids, and they don't want to be in darkness, right? Always leave the light on, Dad. Dad, crack the door a little bit, right? Dad, check the closet. We don't like, even as we get older, darkness does something to us, right? I remember after I got saved and went to a youth group, the guy who was a mentor to me, his dad was the church custodian. And they had a parsonage on the church property, so he lived in the church. And so his son, he was 22, I was 14, and he was my mentor, he was my small group leader. And so we'd have a bunch of guys over to the church, because he lived at the church, he had keys to the church. We'd turn off all the lights and we'd play hide and go seek in the dark in the church. And you know, when you're in the church and it's completely dark and it's at night and you're playing, and see if you identify with this. Last night, Saturday night, they didn't say it. They thought it, but they didn't say it. If you can remember, right, go back to your inner child. Remember when you're hiding and it's completely dark? What is the feeling that comes over your body? What is it? Anxiety? Is that what he said? Anybody else? You're thinking it, you just don't want to say it. No. Don't you feel like you got to go to the bathroom? You know that fear when you're there and it's like all of a sudden like it brings nervousness out of you, and you feel like you're hiding, and you just realize like I gotta go to the bathroom. That happened to me all the time. We used to play hide and seek in the dark, and so when we moved into this building, I wanted to pass on the tradition to my kids. So we moved into here in 2015, and one night I said, "All right, kids, come on." We got in the car, brought Dana over, and we turned off all the lights. It was like 10 o'clock at night. We said the rules were you had to stay on the first floor, and so we're playing hide and seek in here. And my son at the time, he was a really good hider, and we could not find him. Like, we could not find him. And then we heard, "Hey!" And he would yell, "Woo-hoo!" And so we narrowed it down that he was in this room somewhere. So we come in this room, and we're looking around this whole room. We could not find him. And here, where he was over here. These stairs are portable, they move, and they're hollow underneath. He was underneath these stairs, underneath here, in a great hiding spot. He's like, "I was so scared underneath there. I was hoping you would come find me," because nobody likes the darkness. And here is this man whose life is just full of darkness. And Jesus is going to use it as an illustration of him literally being the light of the world and being able to bring light into people's lives. Not just people that are blind, but listen, people that are spiritually blind is what Jesus is going to do. And so, now the question, verse 2, the question, his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And so this question reveals kind of the theological position of the day, the thinking of the day. It was what the religious leaders had kind of taught. It was the idea of karma, basically, that you get what you deserve. You're bad, you get bad. You're good, you get good. And it was their very just works-based mentality, and it was just, it was a legalistic way of living. And this is why they had no room for the grace and the love of Jesus, because it flew in the face of their thinking. And so if you had a child that was born with some kind of issue or some kind of birth issue, then it was either, they even would say the child did something in the womb, the child sinned in the womb, and that's why the child was born that way, or the parents have sinned, and this is the punishment, this is the result of the sin. This was their mentality of the day. And so this is what the disciples pre-Jesus kind of grew up in. That was the religion of the day. And so they come to Jesus, they see this blind guy, and they're like, "Oh, well, either he did something in the womb or his parents did something. Jesus, which one is it?" And Jesus is going to basically say, those are really bad questions. And when you ask a bad question, you often get bad answers. Jesus is going to say, there's a third option. And the third option he's going to give is not one that they thought of, and it's one still today that, frankly, we don't like the answer to, but it's the answer that Jesus provides. And so here he is in verse 3. He says, Neither this man nor his parents sinned," Jesus answered. "This came about so that God's works might be displayed in him." Jesus is basically saying, those are the wrong questions that you're asking. It wasn't either of those options. This is all so right now, God can do an amazing work in his life, and the glory of God can be revealed. And so we don't like that answer. We don't like that answer. And Jesus is going to say, listen, it's not that this guy is bad, it's just that this guy is broken. And that's what happens to us, isn't it? When you live in a broken world breaks people. And we live in a broken world, and it spills onto us every day, and it hurts relationships, issues, health issues, financial issues, all kinds of issues that just come into our life. It's a symptom of living in a broken world. And God's answer is basically this. He's basically saying, don't ask the why question. Why did you do this? Why is this happening to me? Why now? He rather is saying it's a what question. What is happening right here? And here's what he's saying. God's about to work. God's about to work. And it reminds me of the great promise in Romans chapter 9. Excuse me. Romans chapter 8, verse 28 says this. "We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God and who are called according to his purpose." That's a promise from God. That whatever issue, whatever struggle, whatever situation you're going on, somehow God is going to work it together for good. I need you to know that God does not waste pain. The pain that you're going through, He sees. Don't forget, He knows, He cares, and God is not going to waste that pain. Somehow the promise is you got to hold on to it in the midst of the storm. God, I don't know why, but I know the what. Somehow you're going to work this together, and if all you do is camp out on the why, you might miss the what. And you'll never maybe even get an answer for the why, which is even more frustrated in the midst of a storm. And so instead of why, start looking for the what. God, what are you doing here? What do you want me to see? What do you want me to learn? What is going to happen? Sometimes you know. Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes it's years. Sometimes you might not ever see the what. It might not be till you get to the other side of heaven. And that you can play back the DVD and look and be like, I did not know that 8 years later this happened and then that happened because of when this happened. Oh my goodness. And what I know is that often the what that God will do is somehow use the ugliness of your situation to somehow bring hope or peace or joy to the thing that is number one on God's heart. People. That's usually the way it works, is that somehow God's going to bring about good from the pain that you're in so that you can somehow be a source of comfort to somebody else as they're going through a situation. This is what it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Listen to what the Apostle Paul says. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort. He comforts us in all of our affliction so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any kind of affliction through or with the comfort that we ourselves have received from God. And so there's this like comfort connection that happens here, that God comforts you in the midst of your affliction so that you might be a part of somebody else's story. And that you might bring hope and light and love into somebody else's pain. And so what we know and what we learn from John chapter 9 is God is always at work. He's working for His good and for His glory. We don't always see it, but we know He's going to do it. And we stop and we take stock in the promises of God. And so after sharing with the disciples, you guys are asking the wrong question. You think there's only two options. There's a third option. He goes on and talking about the works of God. He says, verse 4, we must do the works of Him who sent me while it is day. Notice he included the disciples. He said we, not I. This is like the first time he said we, not I. He's like, I'm going to do my Father's work. Now he's bringing the guys in. We must do the works of Him who sent me while it is day. Like, time is now. This is why we're doing this. The time is now. Night is coming when no one can work. Jesus is saying, we don't know how much time we have. The time is now. As long as I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. Now is the time, church, to do the works of God. And then it says, after He said these things, this is where it gets really interesting. He spit on the ground, made some mud from the saliva, and spread the mud on blind Bart's eyes. Go, He told him, wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he left, washed, and came back seeing. John records it very matter-of-factly. I think this is an unbelievable miracle. It's one of my favorites. It's crazy, right? Here's some interesting and funny observations, right, that you need to use your holy imagination. It's not a stretch. I think it's very much as part of what's happening in the story here. Here's the first funny thing I think that's happening is the individual is blind. And so I don't know if Jesus made a noise or not when He spit, but if you close your eyes, right, close your eyes, and you hear, right, you hear that, you would probably wonder what's going on. And then the next thing you know, he did not know it was coming. He was blind. 2 mud cakes go into his eyes, right? And so he's got to be thinking, what in the world is going on? He just met Jesus. He didn't know Jesus. We're going to see as the story goes on. He kind of really didn't know much about Jesus. And so all he knows is he just got some mud put into his eyes. I think that's funny thing number 1. Funny thing number 2 is, for years, you got to wonder, why did Jesus do this way? Do you ever wonder that? You know the Bible, you know the story. Why? I mean, could Jesus have not have just said, sight, be restored, and his eyes opened? Could Jesus have not just gone, here, put his hand right here, and just... Why did Jesus spit into the dirt and make mud? Like, why did he do it that way? I never got it. I never really knew. I just thought Jesus was being creative, but I think there's something else that's going on. Here's what I think is happening. Do you remember like a month ago when I told you about the Pharisees and all their crazy legalistic rules they had that they would follow, all their rules? And one of their rules was about working on the Sabbath and what was considered work and not work. And if a man spit and it landed on a rock, it wasn't work. But if he spit and it landed in the dirt and it made a furrow, it was a trench, that was considered working, and that was a sin. Do you remember this? Thank you. I did tell you this. I remember it. I told you, right? Here is exactly what I think Jesus is doing. He's just sticking it to the Pharisees. We're going to find out later. It is the Sabbath, and Jesus is going to show them and just kind of be like, this is your rules and your religiosity is so ridiculous that if I spit and it hits a rock, it's not work, but if I spit and I hit the dirt and that is work. And I think Jesus is just going like, and spits in the dirt as just as this be like, this, you guys are ridiculous. I could be wrong, it's conjecture, but why else would Jesus spit in the dirt on the Sabbath and make mud pies to put in this guy's eyes? And then he does it and tells the guy to go to the pool of Siloam, which, doesn't mean anything to us. It will if you go on our trip to Israel. Let me kind of help you with here. Throw up that map if you would for me. So this is all taking place. You go back to chapter 8, you recognize that Jesus is speaking, as says, out by the treasury of the temple, which is at the top of the screen, okay? And so the pool of Siloam is this body of water right here. You ever get anything in your eye? You ever get a piece of dirt in your eye, something like that? How's it feel? Horrible, not good. This guy's got 2 mud cakes popped in his eye, and now Jesus says, they're up there. And now he says, I want you to come down and I want you to walk and go to the pool of Siloam. So now blind Bart has to go through the city with mud in his eyes all the way down to the pool of Siloam to wash. Here's the other thing. Can you go back to the verse for me? Go back a couple slides. Now watch this. After he said these things, he spit on the ground, made some mud from the saliva, spread the mud on his eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he left. Wait, what did Jesus not say? Here, let me play it out for you. I make mud, put it on your eyes, I say, go wash in the pool. He did not say, and you will be healed. There was no promise attached to the crazy action, right? There was no promise spoken by Jesus. And listen, I think there's some takeaway here. Here's takeaway number 1. Sometimes God is going to ask you to do things that to you don't make sense. To you, it's not fitting your way. It's not fitting your personality. It's outside your box. It's a stretch of faith. You just can't see what good is going to become of this, right? This has to be the case for this guy. Why is he putting mud in my eyes? Now I got to find my way through the city down without the promise. Here's the amazing thing about you and I. We have the promises of God, and yet sometimes we still disobey God, knowing the promise is there because every promise is a yes in Jesus Christ. So we have the promises of God. The promises of God are accessed by our obedience to what God tells us to do. And so many of us, listen, are not experiencing the promises of God because we're not obeying the things that God has told us to do. We don't want to take the trip through the city of Salem or to get to the pool. That don't make sense. Why is this? No, I'm not going to do that. And we forfeit the promises of God, which bring the blessings of God, because we don't obey God. Because in our mind, it doesn't make sense. This is another reason why I love blind Bart. Jesus says, go wash in the pool without the promise. All right. And he begins his way through the city to the pool of Siloam. Can you imagine? Again, use your holy imagination. He finally gets there. He gets to the pool. He goes down. He starts lathering up. And he opens his eyes. And for the first time in his life, he sees. The first time. He sees a face. He sees people. You got to wonder, did he possibly even see his own reflection? Did he see his face for the first time? And he stands up and he looks and he sees the city that he's lived in his whole life. Imagine, for the first time, he sees. It's pretty amazing. Well, he comes back and there's some discussion going on with the neighbors about this whole thing. And again, this is where I think it gets even more funny. Verse 8 says, his neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar said, isn't this the one who used to sit begging? And some said, yeah, he's the one. And others were saying, no, but it does look like him. I love this. And he kept saying, I'm the one. Yeah, it's me, right? There they are. Hey, is that Bart? Like, no, that's not Bart. Look, that guy's seeing. And the other's like, no, I think that is Bart. It looks like him. It's not Bart. He's like, it is me. I am the one. It is me. He kept saying it. So they asked him, well, then how are your eyes open? And he answered, listen, the man called Jesus, this is all he knows. The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and told me to go to Siloam and wash. So when I went and washed, I received my sight. This is all he knows. The man named Jesus, that's all he knows about him at this point. Told me to do this and I did it. And then they say, well, where is he? They asked. I don't know, he said. He wouldn't know. He has no idea what Jesus looks like. He never saw him. So how would he? It's like, I don't know, even know who he is, what he looks like. So the neighbors, they got to figure this out. So here's what they're going to do. They're going to bring blind Bart to the Pharisees. They're going to bring him to the pastor. Let's get the pastor involved for some spiritual direction here. What's going on? So they're going to bring him to the Pharisees. And now the Pharisees are going to be between a rock and a hard place. Because they either got to say, this guy's a faker, or they got to say, Jesus really has some power and must be from God. And so they're gonna have 3 interrogations is what's going to happen. You can throw up the next one. 3 interrogations. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to interrogate our buddy Blind Bart and try to get the scoop from him. And they ain't going to like how that goes. So then they're going to be like, we want to talk to your parents. So they're going to bring in Blind Bart's parents and they're going to talk to him and talk to them. They ain't going to like how that goes. And then they're going to bring Blind Bart back in again. That's how the chapter kind of unfolds. We'll see how it goes. Here's interrogation number 1. They talk to Blind Bart. So they brought in the man who used to be blind to the Pharisees. The day that Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes was a Sabbath. So John is telling us now this is why it's an issue. Then the Pharisees asked him again how he received his sight. Listen, I just love the simplicity in the way that Blind Bart just says, like, he put mud on my eyes. He told them, I washed and I can see. Some Pharisees said, this man is not from God, talking about Jesus. This man is not from God because he doesn't keep the Sabbath. Can you get how hard their hearts and closed their mind is when they literally have a person that has been blind their whole life is standing literally in front of them saying, this guy made mud, put it on my eyes, and now I can see. And the first thing they say is, yeah, but he did it on the Sabbath. He can't be from God. Like, that was their first reaction. This guy can't be from God. He did it on the Sabbath. He spit on the ground on the Sabbath. He worked on the Sabbath. Listen, lest you think this religiosity is not still alive today. I didn't know this. Jeff, our Saturday night worship leader, told us this last night in the Saturday night service, that there is still Orthodox Jews living this way today with all of these rules. They're making new ones to not work on the Sabbath. He said they were over in Israel. Maybe we'll experience this when we go. And there are, in certain hotels, the elevators, so that you don't have to work on the Sabbath and push a button. There's a certain Sabbath elevator designed that you go in, and when you go in, you're not allowed to push a button because that's considered work. It just stops on every floor. Literally, they have engineered a special, it's called the Sabbath elevator, so that you don't, it is still alive today, the spirit of religiosity, and that is going to be pleasing to God. God said don't work on the Sabbath, and so we're not going to push a button. Let's create elevators that just stop on every floor. This idea of that you can work your way to please God, this religious spirit is still alive today. And here it is, the proof of Jesus right in front of them. They don't want to see it. What are they bent out of shape about? This guy did this on the Sabbath. He can't be from God. But others were saying, how can a sinful man perform such signs? And there was a division among them. And again, they asked the blind man, what do you say about him since he opened your eyes? He's a prophet, he said. Now we see blind Bart's faith begin to progress. Even within the story, we're going to see it. How did it start off? This man named Jesus. This man named Jesus. What do you say? He's at least a prophet. Well, they don't like that answer. And so they're going to throw Bart out. And we want to talk to your parents. And blind Bart is a grown man, right? He's not like an 8-year-old boy. He's a grown man. And so it says, the Jews did not believe this about him, that he was blind and received sight. They're calling blind Bart a faker, until they summoned the parents of the one who had received his sight. And so they asked him, is this your son, the one you say was born blind? How then does he now see? Well, we know this is our son and that he has been born blind, his parents answered. And you got to stop and again, use your holy imagination right now. We're not told, we don't have the details, but you know, it's almost like you get the picture that Bart was here being interviewed by the Pharisees. They interview him. They don't like what he has to say. And they're like, go get his parents. And they go and get the parents and bring the parents in. And the first time that blind Bart would have saw his mom, hears his father's voice say, yeah, well, that is our son. But we don't know who opened his eyes, right? He recognizes the voices, but now he's seeing his parents for the first time. We don't know how he now sees. We don't know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He's of age. He's a grown man. He'll speak for himself. And we find out here, verse 22, John tells us his parents said these things because they were afraid of the Jews, since the Jews had already agreed if anyone confessed Jesus as the Messiah, he would be banned from the synagogue. That is why his parents said, he's of age, ask him, right? And so here it is. Following Jesus might cost you. It did back then. You were kicked out of church. And you're like, that's no big deal. I'll just go to another one. Back then, it was there was not synagogues on every street corner. There was one for your town. And when you were removed from it, you were basically an outcast of society. You were kicked out of fellowship, no longer able to be with others, no longer in the family of God. Following Jesus today might cost you too. So they got nowhere with blind Bart. They got nowhere with his parents. So they're going to bring blind Bart back in again and go at him again. So verse 24 says, second time they summoned the man who had been blind and told him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. Talking about Jesus. But give glory to God is basically you're taking an oath. Swear to God, all right? Make hand on the Bible, promise, right? Say it. This man over here is a sinner, is what they're wanting to do. They're inciting this godly oath. Declare Jesus to be a sinner. I love Bart's answer. Whether or not he's a sinner, I don't know. One thing I do know. I was blind, and now I can see. And that's it. That is all I know. I don't know if he's a sinner. I don't know who he is. I don't know how it happened. Here's all I know. I was blind, and now I can see. And then they asked him, well, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And now Bart, and this is why I like him, he starts to get a little persnippety with the Pharisees and starts pushing back a little bit and giving them a hard time. He says, I already told you, he said, you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You don't want to become his disciples too, do you? Right? So now he's really giving them the business. And it says, they then turned around, they ridiculed him. You're that man's disciple. You're just one of his gang, and you're here faking. They say, we're Moses' disciples. We know that God has spoken to Moses. But this man, meaning Jesus, we don't know where he's from. Here's blind Bart's reaction. He's like, this is amazing. This is an amazing thing. This is basically saying, this is ridiculous. The man told them, you don't know where he's from, and yet he opened my eyes? We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he listens to him. So basically he's saying, listen, if this guy was a sinner, God wouldn't listen to him. He wouldn't have been able to open my eyes. Therefore, he did open my eyes. He's not a sinner. God is listening to this man. Then he tells them this. He takes them on a history lesson. Throughout history, blind Bart says, no one has ever heard of someone opening the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he wouldn't be able to do anything. And now they're really irked, right? And they say, you were born entirely in sin. Basically, that's why you were blind. You were born in sin. We're not going to sit here and listen to you lecture us about the history of miracles and what happened. And it says, you're trying to teach us, and they threw him out. Which I just love. And here's the encouragement to you. Here's how we should be encouraged by blind Bart. How many seminaries did he go to? How many Bible studies has he attended? Yet here he is, listen, talking to the theological professors of the day, the pastors of the day, the clergy of the day, the educated of the day. He's standing in front of them for the first time, seeing them in their robes and their gowns and their tassels and their hats and their phylacteries and all. And he don't back down. He doesn't know anything of what they know. He's like, here's all I know. I was blind, now I can see. And this man healed me. Which is encouragement to you and I to not believe the lie that you have to be a theological and Bible expert to talk to people about Jesus. Well, I don't know. I don't understand everything, and I don't know the Bible well enough, and I can't, and I want to. Listen, every single one of you can tell the story of what Jesus has done in your life. How you were once blind and now you see. How God is real to you and how he's impacting you today. And nobody can argue with that. You don't have to be a theological expert to be able to dissect the Greek and know all the books of the Bible. You might not know the difference between an apostle and an epistle, but that's okay, because if you know who Jesus is, you can tell the story of how Jesus has changed your life. And you should let your light shine and not back down because, well, I don't know, I'm not educated, or I don't know the Bible well enough. That's a lie from the enemy to keep you quiet. Let your light shine. Tell the story of what Jesus has done. So, we got to just quickly go on because this is really where the story gets really good. All right? We're going to see now that our buddy here, Blind Bart, is going to be literally a living illustration of fallen mankind that has lived in spiritual darkness. But when you come to know Jesus, your eyes are open to the light and the truth, right? He's a living illustration of the truth that Jesus is the light of the world. This whole thing is a living parable of Jesus being the light of the world, right? It's an analogy. And so Jesus opened his eyes physically, and now we're going to see his heart is going to be open. Look what happens next. I love this. Jesus heard that they had thrown the man out. And when he found him, that's a stop right there. Jesus heard they threw the guy out. And who found who? Jesus found him. It means in order to find something, you have to what? You have to look. Notice the divine intentionality of Jesus saying, I'm going to look for you. I'm going to find you. Why? Because he cared. So Jesus is looking for this guy, and after he found him, he asked him this very important question. Do you believe in the Son of Man? The Son of Man, that was Jesus' favorite nickname for himself. Basically, he's saying, do you believe in the Son of God who came and is a man? Do you believe that Jesus is the Messiah? Do you believe in the Christ? Do you believe that you need a Savior? The guy says, who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? He asked. And Jesus answered, you have seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. And I love Jesus' answer to that. Right? If I came to you and said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And I was Jesus. Do you believe in the Son of Man? And you said, who is he? I could say, it's me. It's me. I'm the Son of Man. The one talking. But it's not what Jesus says. He doesn't say it's me. What does Jesus say? He says what? It is, you have seen him. I love that. 6 hours ago, this guy hasn't seen anything. And now he's saying, you're seeing him. You've seen him. What's his response? Verse 38, I believe, Lord, he said, and he worshiped him. It's the only response that when you know Jesus and when you meet Jesus, when you see Jesus, what's the response when you encounter Jesus? Worship. Worship. And that's how we're going to close. I'm going to ask our worship team to come as I read the last couple verses. Jesus said this. Here's the parable, truth. Living story, little teaching section Jesus gives at the end. I came into this world for judgment in order that those who do not see will see, and those who do see will become blind. Those who, talking about like Pharisee type people, those who think we're good, I got this, I don't need Jesus, I've got it all figured out, keeping God at a distance. Those who see, Jesus says you're actually blind. Those who recognize their own broken condition, their own state of being spiritually blind, Jesus says, I'm going to give you sight. You will see. This is the whole crux of this story, is that every single one of us was born blind, spiritually blind. And apart from Jesus, we would still be spiritually blind. Some of the Pharisees heard Jesus there, and they asked him, we aren't blind too, are we? You talking about us? That's what he's basically saying. You're talking about us? Jesus says, if you were blind, Jesus told him, you wouldn't have sin. But now that you say, we see, your sin remains. See, here's what Jesus is saying. You think you're seeing, your heart is so hardened, your mind is so closed. Jesus is literally right in front of you, and you don't want to see. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe that was you years ago. Man, your heart was so closed towards God. Your mind was so closed towards Jesus. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about because that's your spouse. Those are your kids. Those are your parents, your co-workers, your neighbor. It's only Jesus that can open up their eyes to see the light of the truth. But we all of us, we once were blind, but now we see. How? God, his amazing grace, gives sight to the spiritual blind, opens our hearts so that we can see spiritually. And so, church, listen, what do you do when you encounter Jesus? You worship him. You respond and you say, thank you for giving me sight. Thank you for opening my heart. Thank you for letting me know and see the truth. Thank you for your amazing grace that has come into my life, washed over me, opened up my spiritually blind eyes so that I can see the truth. And that's how we're going to close now, by declaring this truth, singing it from our heart to Jesus right now, to an audience of one. Let's stand, let's worship him together.